So we chose the influencer ecosystem for this call because it's something that very few people in tech policy understand or look at how that space works. And there are regulations that have already come into play, but they're not being implemented. A couple of weeks ago, there were two controversies side by side. One was about an influencer that featured on the front page of a newspaper, and calling them a legitimate expert to be looked at. And it was a personal finance influencer, and became a bit of a controversy. Sarvesh will get into that. And the other was, of course, the fact that multiple ministers have done interviews with another social media influencer, and it seems like that is paid for by the government, because it was said that it's in collaboration with MyGov or something, or the government of India. So two hot controversies. I was actually on a TV show related to that, related to the financial influencer stuff, and some interesting conversations there. Because on the other side was someone who's actually a registered SEBI stock advisor, and these are unregistered advisors on YouTube. So we thought, and a few months ago we were thinking of, we'd done a couple of stories and we were looking at how do we report on the influencer ecosystem. We even considered a story where we would allow someone who manages an influencer agency to write anonymously about what challenges they face working with brands and working with influencers, but we couldn't find someone who'd be willing to do that. So we've been keenly watching this space because there were draft regulations, consultations, and now there are proper regulations that are out related to influencers. And I thought it might be useful to give an overview. Like personally, I've seen that space evolve for over a decade and a half, maybe 2 decades now, actually, because I remember being at a bloggers meet in 2001, 2002, where there were a bunch of PR agency folks that joined us to understand how to work with bloggers, and then subsequently, you've had so the gadget blogging space actually became a major target for agencies trying to influence the influencers, in a sense, who are driving handset purchases. And I've attended a few of those discussions, even though we never did gadgets, but I attended a few of those to figure out what the hell's going on over here. There've been a few controversies around that time as well. So we'll get into that. I have stories to tell, which is, and I think some part of today's discussion will be told via stories, some of them anonymized because I've seen them. But I'll hand over to Sarvesh now to start with some recent controversies just to liven things up. Sarvesh?
No, thanks, Nikhil. Just quickly before we begin, some housekeeping. This is not business, legal, or investment advice, and the information we present is selective. We'll be covering a broad range of topics today, not in this particular order, but how influencers work, what are influencers, the different business models for influencers and for brands, why are influencers being regulated and how are they being regulated, and what is in the pipeline for regulations in the future. I'll start with the controversies. We'll also talk a little bit about the dark side of influencer marketing. With that, I'll just jump into what's been happening recently. And couple of months back, I think in March, the Securities and Exchange Board of India came out with an order against a financial influencer called PR Sundar. So he was fined 6 crore rupees and also banned from trading in the stock market for a year. And this was because he was giving investment advice without being registered with SEBI, and he was earning a living out of it. So by the rules, it's if you're giving stock advice and you're earning money out of it, you need to be a registered investment advisor, which he was not. And soon after this fine, this was the first time SEBI has gone after a particular person for this kind of issue. They've previously targeted Telegram channels and YouTube pump and dump schemes, which we'll also get into later. But this was first time a financial influencer, single person, has been targeted for giving stock advice without a registration. And right after this incident happened, some financial influencers began deleting content from their social media platforms in which they were giving stock tips. And a few days after that, we had one influencer platform, Rigi, come out and say that we are now going to require financial influencers to be registered with SEBI if they want to work on our platform. Fast forward a few months, and we had this full page advertisement in many newspapers where a financial influencer was on the front page with the images of your trust only the real experts. What was interesting was if you look down, we had the government's Métis logo used and the G20 logo used. So then people raised concerns with that on Twitter, saying, is this an endorsement by the government? Which is ironic because they said financial influencers who don't have who are not registered SEBI cannot give, and then there is this newspaper which is calling them the real experts. So they were rightfully there was concerns raised, and Rajiv Chandrasekhar came and said that there's not any kind of endorsement, and they'll be more careful about this going forward.
So just on this, just if you could go back, Sarvesh, on this, uh, one of the things that I was thinking about was that, this ad is there. Rashna Ranade, who's the influencer in this, is a fairly well-known financial expert now on personal finance largely. And, so the question is that could, and if she's not a stock registered, if she's not registered with SEBI and she doesn't do stock advice, could she have run this ad on her own? Sure. This ad has probably been run by YouTube. Could YouTube have run this ad on their own? Sure. I mean, there's nothing that stops her from endorsing herself or from YouTube. Stopping YouTube from endorsing her. The challenge here was the government endorsement part, right? And I would be really surprised if this ad was run by using the Government of India logo without a sign off from the government. So effectively, the government signed off on this, and that's what was the problem with it. Otherwise, I think there's nothing wrong with the ad as such. Anyone can do that, and I know the advice is really about being careful online, but and not just listening to tips from random people. And you get that on SMS, you get that on Twitter, you get that on YouTube as well. But there's nothing wrong with the ad except for the fact that there was a government logo. Then it seemed like the government was endorsing someone. So and Rajiv Chandrasekhar hasn't really said that the government that government permission wasn't there to run this ad. It says that he's saying that they should be more careful, which is an implicit sort of indication that it was approved, and that they need to be more careful about who they approve or what kind of ads they approve from here on. Sarvesh?
Yeah. And so in tandem with that incident with the newspaper, we also had a couple of ministers appear on YouTube podcast, and there are some screenshots on Beer Biceps YouTube channel, the Ranveer show. So if you look at this as well, when you in the description, it initially said co-presented to you by MyGov India. So then questions were raised about what does co-presented mean? Does it mean that these ministers, the government ministries are paying these YouTube channels and YouTube influencers to be there? And then this was also tied into the recent tender that was issued by the government. So where they had called for empanelment of influencer marketing agencies to promote MyGov. So we don't know yet if those YouTube videos are connected to this tender, whether this tender was ultimately given the empanelment was done and it was a outcome of that. It's not yet confirmed, but questions were raised if it's are the appearances of the ministers connected to this tender. And Apar Gupta had put out a long thread on Twitter saying how if it is connected, then there should be more clear disclosures that the government is paying them and it's not a press interview. and what are the different terms of the agreement that the government has with these influencers. So just basically more transparency, not inherently opposed to the idea of influencers featuring ministers, but being more transparent about what's the deal there. Then again, this was a few months back. There was a startup convention event in Noida, and it was dubbed as the world's biggest funding festival. Many startups and their founders bought tickets uh, with the hope that they will meet investors who they can pitch to. But as it turned out, investors and the prominent guests who were promised did not show up. The issue, the part where influencers come here is a lot of these influencers promoted this event. So these are four of the more well-known ones who promoted this event. And later they distanced themselves from the event, saying that their images and videos were used without permission. But if you look at the promo videos, it looks like they are the ones promoting. This was one of the
Yeah. So in that case, actually, the thing is, like, this was a really controversial one. This was in Noida, and like there were there were thousands of people who came from all across the country to attend this, because the indication was that there'd be a lot of investors there, and this is going to be the biggest startup festival ever. And you ended up seeing a situation where there were barely any investors. There were mostly founders, and many of the folks who were supposed to speak didn't turn up. And so while there was a police case that was filed, while there were a lot of issues raised, and this was really buzzing on startup groups that I'm in. Like, I'm on a couple of founders groups, including some, where pretty much the who's who of the founder ecosystem is there. And people were fairly critical of this one. The influencer part of it was one criticism that came out, right? It was a tiny little part of it, but we wanted to highlight that, that things like these work with influencers to also promote themselves, like events like these work with influencers to promote these events. And this is one of the ways of building up hype. Sarvish?
yeah. And lastly, this was a few days back where there was a news about the income tax department sending notices to 15 influencers who are not paying tax, but their lifestyle indicated that they are enjoying luxury holidays, overseas holidays, and they are shopping a lot. So basically, the report said that the income tax department was following these influencers on social media and tracking their expenses. And when matched with how much tax they're paying, they're not paying anything. So the notices were sent. A few days after this, there was another incident in Kerala where tax department raided a few YouTube influencers. So that's the most recent thing. And this again has raised questions about should the income tax department uh, track on social media and do this. And on the other side, there was this argument that it's good that the income tax department is tracking expenses involved in this industry, which is very like there's a lot of money involved, and that these influencers need to be paying the taxes that they owe.
Right. So on this, I'll come. I'll talk a little bit about how this entire ecosystem works, because some of these things could be remuneration in kind rather than cash. So if you're giving someone a holiday, and we've seen some of these things play out over the years. Influencers are essentially, the way I look at it is that influencers are kind of like, they're media properties by themselves. And one of the earliest sort of set of people that I saw this play out with were the handset bloggers, right? Including, for example, I remember attending a Nokia um, event, like a Nokia bloggers meet, where they were basically, the marketing team was there. They were talking to folks about what they think of various devices. People were given devices on the table to try them out. And in some cases there was a magic show, there was music. So what companies would do to basically also just make journalists feel good about them, because journalists are also influencers. In the same way, this was happening with gadget bloggers. So with handset reviewers. So Nokia did this a bunch. I remember that when Oppo or Vivo, one of them, when there was launched there were like 1,000 people in Goa at the launch party. There was, so, these folks were also every year in the mobile industry, and I used to pay my own way and go for this. There's this, the biggest conference is the Mobile World Congress, which happens in Barcelona every year in Feb. Uh, and uh, so we had a situation where um, you know gadget bloggers and handset reviewers were basically flown in by brands like Samsung, and there were like special parties that take place at these events, so they had access to a bunch of things. So they were being essentially, this is like payment in kind, right? I remember a controversy there where Samsung basically was trying to push some of these gadget bloggers whose trip and stay they had paid for, um, to also stand at their stall and explain the features of the gadgets to people coming to the stall. And one of them sort of pushed back against it, and there was a controversy where they were threatening to cancel his ticket and things like that. So this became a big sort of talking point in the blogging community. But these are influencers, and these are brands that are essentially paying them. With and the other thing that happens with a lot of these handset reviewers is that they were given early access to devices before anyone else could get them, and quite often the device review is contingent on, and I'm not saying that they aren't independent people who are independent and do rational, like proper reviews of these things, but all of it's an opinion, right? So there were also instances where they would never take back the devices. I have been for press conferences where uh, they were giving handsets away to people who were attending as well, and I mean, I declined those things just out of ethics. So we've seen a bunch of these things play out. There are also, for example, auto reviewers who get access to vehicles, and quite often, like, there are folks who get access, like they get a different car every week to drive through the week, and they may or may not review it, but these are things that happen in this space, and we've seen these. So these are all domains in which there are types of influencers. So there are influencers in personal finance, there are influencers in stocks and stock markets. Um, uh, Travel is another one, and in travel, basically, the hotels that sort of pay for people's travels to that travel to that destination. There are countries that actually pay, that want to be seen as travel destinations, that also pay people to come over and review and, like, maybe blog about their experience. So you see vloggers, video bloggers all the time doing this. I remember a particular instance in case of fashion. I had gone to a press conference to meet someone. I wasn't reporting on this, and there was a company that was launching a particular app, and so I hung on to meet that company exec and just catch up post the press conference. And I remember that this is related to fashion, and the fashion bloggers were refusing to leave the venue until they got paid in kind, in or cash in some shape or form. And their logic was, we've come to your launch, we are here, and so therefore we've spent time and we're getting nothing in return, right? So these are things that happen. One could say that we are, for example, tech policy influencers at MediaNama, right? So there are pets who are influencers. There are people who show pet products. Gaming is another space. Game reviewers. I remember, for example, there's a friend of mine who used to run uh, uh, a bunch of YouTube channels through his company. They're still running, and cooking was a major part. So I remember sitting down discussing with them about how they're going to monetize it, and essentially they would talk to atta brands and utensil brands, and there'd be a lot of product placement as a part of that. So that's another influencer community in food. Of course, you've seen food reviewers and street food reviewers. Uh, Cooking is another, is also, like, for example, there are people who go and, let's say, who go and into the wilderness and pick up things and cook with that. So there are a bunch of these folks who have great channels, which are widely watched. Fitness is another category that, for example, the protein shake industry sort of focuses on. Uh, Productivity is huge. There are productivity apps that sponsor and work uh, with productivity influencers, and of course, there are climate and sustainability influences, but Surveys knows a little bit more about that uh, than I do. But so most of these influencers are on Instagram, on YouTube. Instagram and YouTube are huge. Um, Twitter in case of finance and productivity is huge. Some of these also feature, for example, on websites, them on e-commerce sites as well. So you'll find that a gadget reviewer is there on Amazon. We've got like a case study for you ahead on Nika, for example, and how they work with influencers. So they have their own personal sites, their own personal blogs. So these are all people who essentially replaced influencers. So what you're seeing is that people are becoming brands by themselves. And uh, if you think about it, right, the deal with social media is that we believe in people rather than believe in brands. So you're more likely to believe in a person who's saying something out of their own beliefs, their own experiences. And so individuals are brands online. And that's where, earlier what used to happen was publishers and had a captive audience. There were very few publishers, and brands could communicate to them through publishers. There have also been obviously controversies in the past. There was a midday expose in 2007 about a newspaper that used to run an entire supplement as an advertorial without calling it an advertorial, where if, let's say, a brand had to have its brand mentioned, then it had to pay. Otherwise, it would say a brand like this. So then Midday actually published a rate card for them. In the same vein, so publishers were effectively means of influencing the wider population. That remit has shifted from publishers to people, to individuals, because we are following individuals and what they say, and because they're more human, they're more believable, they have their own quirks, they have their own style of saying things, they have their own sort of value systems, they have their own beliefs, they have their own idiosyncrasies. So it's a form, it's entertaining, it's also informative. So we end up watching people rather than brands online, and that's where the influencer ecosystem has become so important and such an important part of business. NICA's draft red herring prospectus, I went through it again yesterday for this, and so they've essentially explained why they are. Service the slide isn't showing entirely the last part, but um, so NICA's reasoning is that India has about 300 to 350 million users. Consumers are getting influenced through through what they view on social media platforms, and essentially, what influencers have to say creates an aspirational need for them. And essentially, what they found is that online content is the primary mover of the beauty and personal care domain, which is what Nika operates in, right? And Gen Z and millennials are the primary audience for smartphone. The primary smartphone users. More than 80% of active users on social media platforms are Gen Z and the millennial segment. Um, and they're eager to follow influencers and personalities. Um, and the change in tier one towns, but also now in tier two towns, you're seeing that there's more prominence and more awareness of fashion with an increased disposable income. And so that's one side of it. But the other side of it is the desire to present one's best appearance on social media amongst peers. Um, and if you look at one other manifestation of this, think about how over the years there are devices that have actively promoted themselves as having a selfie camera, right? So the need for people to look good on social media is very real. And handset companies have latched onto that. They've identified that as and talked about a better selfie camera in the same vein that Nykaa is looking at this as a means of sort of a greater demand for beauty products. And so for them, for Nykaa, and this is in their communication to their investors, right? That the live commerce, e-commerce market, influencers, opinion leaders in this domain are an important enabler of discovery. And even the men's segment is growing because of this need to be to look in a particular manner on social media. And so what they're saying is that a rise in the average order value is attributed in this category, in the beauty and personal care category, due to a higher trust commanded by online platforms. And trust is a very important factor, right? And a lot of that trust these brands gain by working with influencers to increase that trust. In the same way, if you look at the rise of financial influencers, why that's happened is because there's lack of adequate financial education in this country. It's not taught in schools. In B and C class towns, there is literally no exposure to how financial products work. Um, you're moving away from a generation that believes in fixed deposits, and so and so financial planning, allocating money to different types of financial options, and the desire to grow rich quick uh, is 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 something that's really working for uh, players who are now actually a mix of both productivity and personal finance influencers, because they're also teaching productivity as a means. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about Ankur Warikoo, but they're also treating productivity as a means of becoming more effective and therefore being able to earn more money, right? So the in BNC class towns, this has become very aspirational. It's kind of, if you think about it, it's what Chetan Bhagat did for publishing. He took English language books to BNC class town. I know Rashmi Bansal, and she's talking about how it's, even with her books, it was possible for her to fill a stadium. Like now, those authors are stars in a sense in themselves, right? So social media is essentially that. There are, for example, even business and productivity folks, and I know a couple of them that are targeting small towns and folks who want to become more organized in their small businesses or start new businesses, and becoming a startup, especially fueled by Shark Tank, but even like it's just precedes Shark Tank. There are business influencers as well who are doing similar things, who are teaching people how to run their business and grow faster, teach growth hacking. So there's a cottage industry of people who are teaching uh, personal productivity, investment strategy, personal finance strategies, stock market strategies, tax saving, business growth. You have, and they're all over Twitter, all over YouTube. In fact, what I've seen over the last 2 months is now there's a massive rise in AI accounts also, who are trying to position like on prompt engineering or which AI tools to use and how you can do your work faster. These are all folks who are also promoting particular AI products, right? Um, Cryptocurrencies, and Sarvesh will talk a little bit about that as well, was another domain where the largely influencer driven. Gary Vee is pretty much the most influential person in crypto. In India, that role is taken uh, by essentially Tanmay Bhatt, who was working with Solana. So there are, I think it's important for us to also look at influencer business models. And Ankur Warikoo, who, by the way, I've known since since before he became a personal finance and productivity influencer. Ankur, I knew him in like 2008, 2009, around that time. Um, and he's actually gone out and put his entire finances in the public domain. So last year, that's calendar year 2022, he made $3.5 million, almost doubling his uh, more than doubling his income year on year. 12.97 crores from from teaching courses with 279,000 students signing up for courses of about 700 rupees each. Corporate talks, 2.03 crores. Brand collaborations is the important one, 10.58 crores. Affiliate income, which he largely donates to towards the education of underprivileged children. And then he launched one book and he's planning a book a year. So he's done his second book now. But book royalty and the books I think were done by Juggernaut Books and and Chiki Sarkar. So book royalties also he's done well. But if you look at it, the two main contributors are brand collaborations and then using his social media presence to drive people to take uh, low cost courses of 700 rupees, right? And that's 12.97 crores. Um, he has over 8 million followers across platforms. Um, and this is his sort of daily, his process, right? One blog, one reel, one shorts every day, uh, 3 YouTube videos, one newsletter, one thread, one Instagram live every week, all produced in advance. 2 live sessions with course students, one online course every quarter. I think he has some 10 courses now, and one book every year. So there's a process to what he's doing. In the same way, you're seeing uh, health influencers, fashion. I've talked about some of these, but they also people also monetize through Patreon. They make money through pay per tweet and updates, and some of that is a cottage industry of 10 rupees per tweet even. And then of course there are brand collaborations. There are collaborations between, let's say, YouTube allows collaborations, Instagram also allows collaborations between a brand and an influencer. Like you post it on both accounts and be seen as co-authors in a sense. And you have, of course, you can do private sessions on YouTube for paying customers. In Q&A, you can someone can prioritize their question by paying for that question to come right on top of the question. So, there are different business models that these influencers have. Um, some influencers, for example, have their own, so they do their own white label products. So they brand products with their own name. You of course have instances in which is slightly controversial of stock tips. So there are folks who move uh, their their Twitter audience onto a Telegram group where they are available for inputs and advice, and then when it comes to investing, they move them towards buying their small case uh, on uh, on small case of obviously. So a bunch of these business models exist for them. Like if you look at Variku's, he has a book and courses. There are one-on-one sessions. There are cohort-based courses. Like and many of these folks collaborate with each other to increase their reach, and both end up making money from that process as well. So the other way that they earn is through free products, like handsets or free cosmetics. I mean, I remember seeing a pitch from a cosmetics product founder who basically went into the math of how they would use influencer marketing. And if you look at it in the last 3 to 4 years, the D2C, the direct to consumer product industry has grown rapidly out, but because they've had channels like Amazon, like Nykaa, like a bunch of these Flipkart, bunch of these platforms for promoting products on. So that new direct to consumer brands have scaled rapidly, but a lot of the money that they make is on their own websites. So they work with influencers to drive traffic to their websites as well. Of course, like I said, that there's early access to information, which also increases traffic on their sites. So gadget bloggers will also make money through ads. Um, direct money compensation actually comes only when you reach a certain scale. Otherwise, it's sort of spread wide in terms of free products and other forms of incentives that they use, like travel or dinners. In the same way, restaurants offer free dinners to influencers. Sometimes when the restaurant is launching, then they'll invite a select group of people for that launch, and there'll be an implicit expectation of promotion. um, so that's how sort of that space works. Now it's the other side, right? For Nika, like I've explained, what's the need for them to work with influencers? One key part of Nika's strategy, for example, is to engage with beauty influencers, creators, and celebrities. And they had a network of 3,055 influencers across platforms, bloggers, makeup artists, celebrities, lifestyle bloggers, fashion bloggers, beauty. So this is from their red herring perspective, right? So this is as official as it can get. Um, and then they have developed a community of bloggers and content creators who make affiliate income on the sales on the platform. So if you saw Variku, for example, his he would make, for example, I think 60 lakhs that he was making was on that commission income on sales, right? So brands work, or the platforms also work with these folks to drive sales. By the way, if in case any of you have any questions, please use chat. We'll get to them. And the post, our talk post, that conversation is going to be entirely off record. Um, so Nika, to their investors, they also have to share their risk factors. So one risk factor that they've shared is that the cost to enter into relationship with influencers or engage in these sponsorship initiatives may increase over time, and their ability to maintain and acquire customers in their financial condition might get impacted if social media platforms change their policies or change their algorithms as well, right? Um, they also work with experts and influencers to conduct events physically in the Nika stores. They also tie up with brands, and when they're launching those brands in India, and there's a case study in the DRHP as well. And a large part of that is actually working with influencers to try and make that brand relevant. So there are, like I said, there are online only brands which are D2C brands. On the dark side, I think Sarvesh will take over from me. Sarvesh?
Yeah, so these are a couple of incidents that point out towards the harms that influencers or influencer marketing can cause. This particular case study is not like a broad trend or anything. So the Misho smear campaign was, I think, last year, where Misho had filed a police complaint against an influencer marketing agency, saying that the agency is engaging influencers to carry out a coordinated smear campaign against the company. And then many people came out on Twitter saying that some of these influencers came out on Twitter saying that they were approached for this campaign, and they were given like a negative topic or a content to talk about Misho for a price. Connected to that is Nika's DRHP. So Nika had also pointed out that this is something that they are also aware of, that there might be campaigns against them uh, by some influencers or some other competing companies. And this was like put out in their risk factors. Nikhil, if you want to add to this, but basically they said any deterioration in relationships with any influencers might damage their reputation, and any negative publicity created by them might also add to that.
Yeah. That's a threat. That's a threat that brands often face. That if they don't continue to pay an influencer, the influencer can turn against them or start promoting a competing product. There's always a risk of them working with uh, with competing products as well. And so it's kind of like a deal with the devil, that you have to keep them happy, because just as they can promote a particular brand, they can also pull it down. And that's why this is a relationship that's quite often either done through an influencer agency which manages influencers, and or through especially through a PR agency, because a PR agency basically is an entity that knows how to work with both sides, brands on one side and influencers on the other side, right? And in fact, like I mentioned earlier, the PR industry was the first to enter this domain. But there are also aggregators that maybe influencers can sign up for, and they will automatically get paid if they do a certain activity. Obviously, on social media, so many of these agencies have a requirement to mark something as sponsored. Platforms also require that if something is sponsored, that disclosure should be there. Of course, it's impossible for platforms to track everything, um, and which is why many of these things slip through the cracks. But we'll get to those aspects later. Sarvesh?
So that was the harms to brands that could arise. The harms to consumers. This is especially in the financial domain. So, this again was a couple of months back. SEBI went after two companies, Sadhana Broadcast Limited and Sharpline Broadcast Limited, and all the entities connected with these two companies. So essentially, what was happening was a pump and dump scheme. The two companies and the owners of these, the majority shareholders in these companies, engage with few YouTube creators, those channels that have been listed here, The Advisor, Moneywise, Midcap Calls, Profit Yatra, and they peddled fake information about these two companies, telling that this company has won this contract, which will give it this much revenue in this many years. There was no such contract at all. And this company has entered with this partnership. This company has made this much money in this quarter. All fake information, but that portrays the company in a good way. As soon as these false claims are made, then paid ads are used to promote those YouTube videos. And eventually, some unsuspecting viewers watch this video and they go and invest in the stock, driving the price of the share up. And as soon as the prices reach a certain level, these YouTube creators and the company owners, they dumped their shares and made an exit. So SEBI cracked down on one such instance a couple of months back. And if you go back a few years, they've been targeting Telegram channels where this is happening, where stock manipulation is rampant. This is one of the charts that SEBI had shared about how post that video, how the share price had increased. So there were four videos posted by uh, creators on YouTube promoting this is the Sadhana Broadcast Limited shares. And as soon as you can see the July 15th, the rise in the share price uh, because of this kind of this influencer marketing that it received. There's
So I don't know. This just reminded me of something actually, so I'll just jump in. Another story. I don't know how many of you have heard the infamous Neera Radia tapes from way back when, right? And I think probably 2009, 2010 when those tapes leaked, and I heard all of them pretty much. And I think I still have some copies with me offline. Uh, I remember a conversation between someone and Neera Radia, and they were talking about how stock market manipulation happens on allegedly on CNBC, and they were saying that there were instances where there would be a negative news story that comes up, citing the stock will go down, and then someone will buy, and then that news will 2-3 days later be reported as having been overturned or false, etc., and the stock would recover, and then someone would make that money in the margin. Essentially, you would short the stock also before the news came out because it was going to come out. So lots of manipulation there, and so this happens a lot with stock tips, and I think it's been on SMS for about a decade now. So influencers are another sort of mechanism for influencing. A service back to you.
Yeah, and another incident that was infamous was paid COVID SOS requests. So back when the pandemic was at its peak, I think 2021, social media influencers were charging money to amplify requests for blood plasma and other reasons. This was again two-sided. The influencer company that was doing this argued that this had actually increased the chances of people who wanted to get access to these health resources get them? And then there was also the ethical concerns of should influencers charge for this? What's the morality over there? Nikhil was also once targeted in one smear campaign. Nikhil, you want to talk about that? Okay, when he comes back, I guess it's better for him to talk about that.
Sorry, my internet connection was a little unstable. So I was once targeted by an influencer campaign. At that point in time, the Aadhaar case was going on, and I was, as I have always been after the first couple of years of being ignorant about it, I have been fairly critical of Aadhaar. And so a friend of mine who was working in an agency calls me up and says, what did you do to anger this entity? And I won't name anyone here, but he's like, what have you done to anger them? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says that, look, I'm looking at a sign off and an order for a social media marketing campaign against you, just basically focused on Aadhaar. And the entity that had signed off on the contract had nothing to do with anything, and had nothing to do with Aadhaar. So I don't know where that came from and how that happened, but for the next 2 hours, and none of these were really influencers, right? They weren't really influential people, but it's about how social media is also used to create those trending topics. And so these are micro. So the one is you go to an individual and work with them who's fairly influential. The other is you sort of distribute that money across multiple people and get something to trend. And so for 2 hours, there was 1 hour, there was this a barrage of tweets coming up from some random accounts. And I just, switched my phone off for an hour and I just waited for it to die down, and then went back on and just reported all of them for spam. But I mean, this is just a tiny little incident that happened to me, but this is how, and that same company also works with influencers, right? So I know someone has asked a question about political influencers, and we'll get to that as well. Sarvesh?
So coming to why are influencers being regulated, couple of not exhaustive, but couple of main points is the impact and reach they have, and how this reach can be misused in terms of causing consumer harm or illegal profiteering. That's especially in the case of financial influencers. Abuse of consumer trust is one of the main cited reasons by ASCI. ASCI receives complaints from consumers about influencers, and one of the reasons, the main complaint that consumers have given is about how their trust has been abused because they didn't know this was connected, like a paid advertisement. The amount of money involved in this industry is another reason that the government is looking at targeting, and the lack of adequate disclosure and transparency. There's nothing inherently wrong with promotions as long as the transparency is there. So these are the main reasons why they are being targeted for regulation. And coming to how are they being regulated, I think the most important regulation over here is the guidelines for prevention of misleading advertisements and endorsements. This was passed in June last year, the guidelines itself. But on top of that, the government had put out another guidelines focused on just influencer endorsements that came out in January this year. And penalty for non-compliance. I will cover what the guidelines itself say, but penalty for non-compliance with this is up to 10 lakh in the first instance, and then up to 50 lakh. And the endorser can be prohibited from doing any more endorsements for a year or even 3 years. Essentially, this was what the government had put out this January. Endorsement know-how. So it talked about when people are endorsing, what should they disclose and how should they disclose, and who is this targeted at. So celebrities, influencers, and virtual influencers. When should they make a disclosure? When they have a material connection with the advertiser or the product that they are promoting. The guidelines also define what a material connection is. So basically any of these. So if you get a monetary or any other kind of compensation, if you get free products, if you're given trips or hotel stays to promote a product, media barters, if you're getting an award or something like that, uh, and any personal relationship with the advertiser. So all these are material connections. And if you have a material connection, then you have to disclose that it's an advertisement. How should the disclosure be? It should be hard to miss. It cannot be buried in a bunch of hashtags or links. It's for like endorsements in pictures, videos, or live streams. There are different ways in which it has to be done. It has to be simple and clear terms that the influencer has to use is like advertisement, sponsored, paid promotion. So it should be clear. It should not be like you can just choose to use your own version of to say that it's being a promoted advertisement. Uh, Apart from this, they're also influencers are also required to do due diligence in terms of whatever products they are endorsing. They need to actually have, in a way, experienced it or used it before they promote it. And this I already covered. So failure to comply with this is liable for action against the Consumer Protection Act. I think someone had asked in the
Yeah, so
about
so
this.
so I'm just reminded that in NICA's DRHP, in the draft red herring prospectus, it also said that they worry that they could be held liable for particular products that the influencer promotes, that might have substances or products which may be banned and not in compliance with particular guidelines. So those right now it's just the Consumer Protection Act, but there are like those are regulatory risks that have also been outlined by NICA in their red herring prospectus. Sarvesh?
Yeah, and there's also guidelines from ASCI, the Advertising Standards Council of India. So these predate the government guidelines. So from 2021, they were applicable, but they're largely similar to whatever I just went through. So I think the government guidelines now take precedence over these. Uh, there are some regulations that are expected. These are not yet finals. We've just had news reports. One is the Consumer Affairs Ministry has suggested the formation of a self-regulatory body for influencer marketing agencies. I think this was in April. Wait, I clicked on the link. One second. Yeah. A qualification for health influencers. So this, again, the Department of Consumer Affairs said that when it comes to health advice, we are probably going to come out with regulations that the person giving the advice must have certain level of qualification. SEBI in November last year actually said that they were looking at formulating guidelines for financial influencers. But then earlier this year in April, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said that there is currently no proposal to regulate the financial influencer space, and that citizens must just exercise a strong sense of caution. So it's not yet clear if SEBI is working on something. There was actually one time a SEBI had uploaded a PDF for around these guidelines and then took it down immediately. So we don't know if anything is in the works with SEBI or not. So how other countries are approaching one. I haven't put all the other countries, but one example is China. China came out earlier this year or last year. I think last year they came out with this rule that any influencers in the field of education, finance, law, and medicine must have certain qualification. They must have either a degree or something like that, or they must be registered with whichever concerned authorities there for that domain.
Yeah, so a little bit of history. Like I said, I've been tracking this for a while, and I'd seen that entire all of those issues around bloggers. So one of the submissions that we had made to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Paid News, I think it was in 2011, actually addressed a bunch of those issues, where we also suggested that this strict disclosure guidelines should be available, should be in there uh, for online publications, for bloggers, and for as well. At that time, the term influencers and the users of social media for these things was fairly limited. Um, and because I'd seen the behavior, in case of travel bloggers in terms of gadget and handset bloggers, and YouTube actually was a huge boon for many of these segments, and now a large part of the business is actually driven by Instagram. So our submission actually talked about what kind of disclosures need to be made with each piece of content, as well as with each and both material, immaterial, material, direct financial, as well as equity related, because it's a submission on paid news, and at that time Times private treaties was also being talked about, and where the Times of India group would take stake in companies in exchange for running ads. And this was a process which was not related to influencers, but there was an allegation that they were promoting these companies in editorial. In fact, like most media companies did this prop for property or equity. Like Hindustan Times, I remember um, in their financial results, actually detailed out how much money, like what kind of investment or what kind of property they had acquired in exchange for running ads on the platform. But again, editorial was never a part of it, but there was always an allegation of editorial support to these entities. Swetita Dalal had done this infamous article, and in fact, MediaNama's launch story was also on this issue of paid news, and we did an interview with Shiv Kumar, who was the CEO of Times Private Treaties at that point in time. And that was a pretty controversial interview that we launched with this. So you might want to go and check out that interview. It still has some critique of this particular domain, but we were like a little early in terms of highlighting how they need to be ethical norms, and I got into many Twitter spats with I remember particularly with a fashion blogger whose response was at that point in time when I said that they need disclosures around this was that uh, media can make money through advertisements, we can't, and this is how we make money. Why do we need to disclose it? And it'll hurt our business model, etc., etc. So this has been around for a while. Sarvesh?
Yeah, we've covered this.
Yeah. So in case of like I was talking about Nykaa, that they are concerned about the guidelines related to influencer marketing that might that might actually impact their business, um, and that advertising content, there is a fear that if there's stuff being advertised or promoted by influencers, that it must have sort of, they need to verify that it's got various government approvals and the advertisers operating qualifications, proof of quality inspection. So these are all requirements that advertisers even when it comes to influencer marketing. Next. Yeah. So this is our coverage of influencers so far. This presentation and this call, which is being recorded, will be uploaded. But we've been tracking this, as you can see. This is just like the last few couple of years of stories that we've done. But we have a lot on this domain, and we will continue to track it. It's a critical part of online advertising today. So in case you have any questions, uh, I mean, there are some questions in chat, so we'll take those. Sarvesh, could you stop sharing the screen, please? And Rakesh, can you stop recording?